And welcome to Tuesday Newsday, your number one resource for the entire week's worth of VR news. It's about time. Meta is finally addressing arguably the Quest's biggest problem with a complete user interface overhaul, which looks pretty alright, and we'll talk about it. But there's potentially something way bigger that's happening with Meta and the entire Quest platform, as reportedly the Quest 4 and Quest 4S have either been delayed indefinitely or even canceled in exchange for a different kind of device. And if this is what I think it is, it has me incredibly excited. But that's not it. I mean, we gotta talk about this. The ousted founder of Oculus has partnered back with Meta? Yeah, we got a lot to cover. So let's just get right into the news. There are a lot of good things that I could say about the Quest line over the past few years, and they've gotten millions of people into VR. That said, I think we all know that the Quest as a platform is far from perfect in a lot of ways. But one of the biggest shortcomings that I personally have complained about for years is the Quest user interface. And I'm not the only one. Arguably, the number one complaint from actual Quest users over the years has been the UI. But this is all subject to change starting now, as the UI overhaul that was teased about a year ago is finally showing up in headsets, and it's surprisingly controversial. This is what Meta calls the Navigator, available to some users now through the PTC, but said to roll out to everyone in the coming months, which is a really long time to roll out an overhaul like this, but I kinda get it. The last thing Meta would want to do is break thousands of Quests with a buggy update. Not that they'd ever do that, of course. So basically, the Navigator is a complete UI redesign that to me looks somewhere between where Horizon OS was and where Vision OS currently is, at least stylistically. Moving the app library to a scrollable home screen with a more spatial-like arrangement, built to be less intrusive and quite a bit cleaner, as the Navigator prioritizes getting out of your way, which is very Vision OS-like, something that I'm a fan of. Now, surprisingly, the overall has gotten a decent amount of hate online, including from John Carmack, the ex-CTO of Oculus, speaking out against the usage of translucency both in Windows and in various UI elements, others harkening back to the day of Windows Vista era transparent glassy user interfaces, and I'm not gonna lie, I really don't quite agree. While I think VR UIs could and should be a whole lot more interesting and three-dimensional than what this overhaul brings, and of course transparent and translucent windows have their own fair share of critiques, I really welcome the change, specifically the less intrusive nature of the Navigator system. And I have a feeling that a lot of the negative feedback comes from a place of overall disappointment in Meta, not over this one update or its aesthetics, but instead over the fact that the company has basically just gone back to the exact same design principles that they used 10 years ago. It can kind of feel like we haven't gone anywhere. But often you learn what not to do before you ever learn what to do and why to do it. And so my only real complaint so far with this UI overhaul is the weird gray smudge that pops up behind the app library and home screen. It seems entirely unnecessary and a little ugly, as it just pops in without any animation and covers up your view. And I truly hope that that's something that we can just turn off. And I should also say that while I'm optimistic for this update and the future of Quest UI, I do think this is a step in the right direction. It is a little hard to judge, as none of my headsets have the update yet. I've been checking them every single day, so I'll have more thoughts on it as it rolls out to more people and as I actually get it in my hands. But that's not the only news regarding Quest, as the entire Quest platform as we know it may be completely shifting directions in more ways than just user interface. As reportedly, the Quest 4 that was planned for a 2026 launch, as well as the Quest 4S that was set to launch after the 4, have both been canceled. And in their place is a new device that is of an entirely different class. And we'll talk about what that is and what that means in a second. First, I do want to talk about the state of the Quest line and potentially why this is happening, because I think it's really telling, and a lot of the ways that the industry has felt lately might make a little bit more sense. Despite some of the positivity, the Quest 3 and Quest 3S have failed to meet growth expectations. While they haven't flopped by any metric, neither headset has had the explosive adoption that the Quest Quest 2 had, which makes total sense. The economic and world situation is vastly different today than it was in 2020. Meanwhile, the newer Quest headsets themselves, while better in many ways, aren't really all that different or exciting, especially from the mindset of someone that has a Quest 2 that's collecting dust in their closet. And I'm not sure if it's just me, but especially for this first part of the year, you can kind of just feel the vibes. There's not a whole lot of exciting stuff going on, and the air just feels a little stale. And those feelings are reflected in Meta's Q1 2025 revenue report. Once again, Meta Quest sales have been on the decline, which has been the trend for basically the past couple years. Again, I'm not saying that the Quest 3 and 3S are commercial failures, far from it, and I'm also not saying they're bad. I like my Quest. And the Quest 3 and 3S did do respectable numbers, especially around holidays. But for a company like Meta that expects year-over-year growth in their categories, especially whenever you've got multiple hardware launches to seed that growth, when the data shows that your market is actually declining year-over-year and not growing, it's a clear signal that something needs to change. And at least to someone in Meta, they don't think that repeating themselves and launching a slightly better Quest yet again will bring the growth that they're looking for. And so Meta is pivoting. And this is where we get into a bit of conjecture, because exactly what Meta is pivoting to is hard to be sure of. But this is the device that was outlined that Meta is reportedly shipping instead of the Quest 4 next year. It is, quote, a bulky pair of glasses that weighs less than 110 grams, ships with no controllers, opting instead for the Vision Pro style gaze and pinch primary input, runs on the new Navigator style Horizon OS, with the battery and compute offloaded in a separate tethered puck, similar to the Vision Pro, likely featuring eye tracking, high resolution pass-through cameras, as well as tracking cameras. And since it's tiny, it also has micro OLED displays, as you don't really get a small 110 gram device without them. Now, to some people that I've talked to, when given that description, their immediate takeaway is that this sounds like some sort of AR first, non-gaming display replacement device. And I say that in kind of a negative way. Nobody that I've talked to really seems all that excited when they outline this codename Puffin, which is the codename for this thing. But to me, this sounds like a dream device. And so based on that short description, I'm gonna lay out what I kind of hope Puffin is, what I imagine it is off of the specs that were given. And to me, the biggest clue is the information's report that Puffin, at the time of their report, is a bulky pair of glasses that weighs less than 110 grams. To me, bulky glasses and 110 grams means probably something a little different, as when I hear VR and 110 grams, I think immediately of the Big Screen Beyond 2, which is a 2.5K per eye micro OLED PC VR headset that weighs around 107 grams. It's my current main PC VR headset, and let me tell you, there are so many times that I wish I could connect this headset to some sort of compute puck and just use it as my everything headset. If I could have like a Quest 3 battery with Quest 3 compute and just plug it in, I would. But obviously, I can't. And after using both the Quest 3 and Beyond side by side, basically daily, I can say without a doubt that if Meta's new Puffin isn't actually a set of bulky glasses, I mean, gosh, I hope it's not. If there's one thing I truly dislike, it's the big bulky glasses form factor for VR devices. It's been tried and it doesn't work, and is instead a Big Screen Beyond form factor device with good pass-through, inside-out camera tracking, eye tracking, and optional controllers, sold as an accessory, with micro OLED displays and a tethered compute puck and battery, then I am so sold. That device would legitimately be combining the best of all three worlds that we have in VR right now, mixing Meta's giant software catalog, camera API, and fantastic tracking and controllers with the Vision Pro's minimal UI and tethered battery, and then of course mix that all with Big Screen Beyond's tiny form factor that allows me to stay in VR longer and way more comfortably, all packaged together with micro OLEDs that look great. Look, if Puffin is that, and if Meta doesn't find some way to gimp this device, and if Puffin has all the same capabilities of Quest with the catalog, I believe this could be a real, true winner. But maybe that's hopeful thinking. I will say though, if you are disappointed that the Quest 4 and 4S, whatever they were going to be, are not coming to market, at least not in the next 2 years, I actually kind of feel like it's a good thing for our current market. For one, it's good news for current Quest 3 and 3S users. It looks like if you recently bought a 3 or 3S, you are almost guaranteed going to get at least 2 to 4 years of your device being supported and viable. Now, the downside to this is that for the next 2 to 4 years, we're basically locked in with the Quest 3's Meta's hardware, which is the Snapdragon XR2 Gen 2, which, yeah, has its limitations, that's for sure. But paradoxically, a guarantee that Quest 3 and XR2 Gen 2 has 3 or 4 years ahead of it means that studios may commit more resources to the current hardware, rather than waiting on the next chipset. And take it from personal experience, you really can squeeze a ton of performance and great visuals out of the XR2 Gen 2, but it takes development time. Optimization is just a time-intensive process. And so I'm actually all for a pause on mainline Quest headsets, at least for a while. Slap on a new UI and let developers cook on a stable platform that has users and let the platform mature. And on top of that, Meta has mentioned multiple times that third parties will be building hardware that uses Horizon OS. So if you're itching for a Quest upgrade next year and whatever puffin is doesn't seem like it's for you, then there might be an option to hold you over. And regarding that, I'm not sure if any of the leaks are true, but if they are, Asus seems to be cooking up a ridiculous headset on Horizon OS. Early rumors state micro OLED or QLED, all gaming focused with eye and face tracking with potentially a new chipset to support all that, but those are all rumors and they're kind of thin, to be honest. Either way, I am super excited for all this movement. But now, on to the kind of big thing. Apparently, Palmer Luckey and Meta are now working together again. And if you don't know the story of why that's kind of shocking, I'll keep it brief. Palmer Luckey is more or less known as the father of modern VR, creating headsets out of a trailer to found Oculus before Oculus itself was acquired by Facebook. And long story short, he was kicked out of his own company by Facebook mostly because he donated $10,000 to a pro-Trump organization in 2016. Multiple people have come out since and said that it was basically a political witch hunt, which checks out with the culture of the time. But still, after acquisition, he was basically ousted out of the company that he made. After which, Palmer founded a new company, Anduril, a defense company that has been doing remarkably well, valued at over $20 billion. And a few months ago, I reported that Palmer Luckey was actually back in the VR industry as Anduril had been awarded the contract for the IVAS, or Integrated Visual Augmentation System, a contract that seems to be very fitting for the company. And well, possibly the most unpredictable thing happened this week. Palmer Luckey and Mark Zuckerberg announced a collaborative partnership. The announcement reads, quote, Anduril and Meta are partnering to design, build, and field a range of integrated XR products that provide warfighters with enhanced perception and enables intuitive control of autonomous platforms on the battlefield, end quote. Luckey states that while he will never forget being ousted from his own company, and he's talked about how the experience has changed the way he does business, he also states that the people responsible for his ousting no longer even work at Meta, and that there's no point in being angry with ghosts or holding grudges. Here's the thing though, this is kind of a big deal even for consumer side stuff. This may be the sort of partnership that even enables something like Project Orion to happen. Project Orion being Meta's AR platform, which is probably the most impressive piece of hardware technology that's been shown off publicly in the past decade. And without this partnership, something like Project Orion might not even be really possible for consumers, at least not for a long time. And I've talked a little bit about Meta's truly groundbreaking lens technology in Orion, that being the silicon carbide waveguides that allow for far higher perceived resolution, superior brightness, a wider field of view, and better clarity than any AR optic stack in history. But silicon carbide optics, as much as it is a silver bullet for augmented reality, is flat out too expensive to manufacture for any consumer device. The silicon carbide optics mass manufacture industry just doesn't exist right now. And so if these waveguides are going to ever take advantage of economies of scale, then that manufacture pipeline has to be built from the ground up. And so, in a tale as old as industrialism, cheap consumer electronics, in this case, the future of compute and entertainment, will be built in the wake of military and defense innovation. And I have a feeling that looking back at this partnership, we're going to see where a few really big things all come together. And so, I think this marks as a true turning point. Old grudges have been left behind and new partnerships have been made. Meta is changing directions, building what seems to be a relatively risky new class of device. We have a fresh new UI direction moving forward for all of Meta's hardware. New third-party devices are on their way to fill the Quest 4's gap, all while Android XR heats up, Valve puts the finishing touches on Deckard, and Apple continues to work on their vision. Yeah, things are looking pretty exciting. Of course, don't forget to leave a question of the week down below. I may just answer yours in the next video, or I'll just leave a comment. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video if you loved it, subscribe if you want more of this, and hit that freaking bell if you just can't live without it. Much love, Thrill out.